Okay, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the Nikon F2. This is a camera that I have quite a bit, quite a bit of experience with. This the second one I owned. The first one I probably owned for, I don't know, probably 6, 7 years, something like that. And then I kind of got out of photography for a while, and I immediately regretted getting rid of it. Basically, it sat in a closet for a year or two, and I just don't like things sitting around. So anyway, I picked up this one a while ago, and I put a few rolls of film through it, and it's just it's an amazing camera, and I wanted to make a video not on a history lesson. Okay, this is old enough now to be a museum piece, but that's not really the type of video I want to make. What I want to make is this a good, if you want an all manual film camera, you know, is this a camera for you? There's lots of choices out there, and this is just one of them. So let me start off by just saying some of the things that I don't like about it. Okay. Uh, First and foremost, most of these come with the DP1 viewfinder on there. Okay, so on the F series cameras, these are always you can take this whole head off and put different ones on there if you want. But the DP1 is the most common. It's an electronic meter inside here. It's the only electronic part of this camera. Everything else is completely manual with this, and these meters are pretty good. However, they are not my favorite to use in the viewfinder. Now, I may just put a picture of what that looks like up on the screen because this most certainly will not focus. But basically, your readouts, your meter readouts, are down way at the bottom of the viewfinder, and there's a big gap. You have your overexposure and your underexposure, and it's very difficult. That needle is going to, you kind of want it right in the middle of that big open area. And again, I'll put a picture up of what this looks like. And I just don't find it very precise. The meter in this camera actually works very well. However, it's just, I do not get along. My brain does not decipher that meter reading very well. So it basically tells you if you're under or overexposed, and that's about it. So keep in mind this camera does not have aperture priority, so it's just going to tell you when you set your aperture. It's just going to tell you based on your shutter speed if you're good or not. And of course, on the F2, unlike a lot of other cameras of the era, this is your ISO or your ASA up here. It's actually right back here is where you see your shutter speed. So goes up to 1/2000th of the second, which is actually pretty good for a camera that came out in the early 70s. A lot of these cameras were probably limited to 500th of a second, or maybe 1,000th of a second. And then as the 70s went on, I would say that definitely got better. A lot of cameras had higher shutter speeds, but that's probably my biggest complaint about the F2. The meter in there, I do not get along with it. The other thing that can be a little frustrating is on all the Nikons, and this is not specific to the F2, that have the prong on here. It's once you get used to it, it's not too bad, but it does get annoying when it to mount and dismount the camera sometimes. So as a general rule, mounting's very easy, but what you cannot forget when you mount this. So let me start over again. So okay, aperture set at f16. You see you have a little prong right here. That's your aperture prong, and then you're going to see up here. Now this camera will go down to a 1.2 lens. Okay, so mounting Nikon for whatever reason complete opposite. So take your dot, line it up with that dot, and then lefty tighty, righty loosey, complete opposite of everything else. Now, as soon as you do that, this prong will grab onto the metering prong. Now, you're not done yet, and I did this a few times on my old F2. You have to manually move your aperture. You you basically do the full length of the aperture. So right now, as far as the meter is concerned, we have a 5.6 aperture lens on there. So what we have to do is lower the aperture, and you'll see it go down. And then as you can see, this is a 50 millimeter f2. And when we bottom out there, that'll be f2. So you have to do that every time you mount a lens on. You have to. I kind of just automatically now have gotten used to just doing one of those, and then you're good to go after that. After that, the camera knows what aperture you have selected for the meter. The second big downfall, or I guess third, the meter, mounting the lens, although that you do get used to. The meter is just more of an annoyance more than anything, and it's just something I don't really jive well with. The next thing is, and this would go for all professional grade bodies from Nikon or other manufacturers, is this thing is very heavy. You're going to notice this thing. Even with just a 50 millimeter lens on here, this thing's a chunk. You put this on a shoulder strap, and it wears on you. So, what I would say most people are going to go for. Now, I have a Minolta here. This is my XD11, and but you could insert any number of, Nikon film bodies of similar size, something like the FE, the FM, the FA. There's a million of them. Much lighter camera, and I tend to not be too picky on if a camera is really heavy or not. However, I will say there are times where I do not want to lug this thing along. If I'm going to be mounting it on a tripod, or I'm not going to be walking around with it all day, sure, no problem. I don't mind carrying this around. I don't mind the extra weight. But if you just want something that you're going to walk around with, boy, it's hard to beat something lightweight like an XD11 or Nikon FM, FA, something like that. So the weight is definitely a big detractor from it. So I wanted to bring out a smaller film body just to show you, these are much lighter and they're much easier to deal with in terms of if you're going to be carrying them around all day long. So I will put that off to the side. The other thing that I would mention is meter, like I talked about. What I wish they did, and again, I may insert another picture of that. What I wish they did is what they did on something like this has a totally different meter reading. Now, the meter in this camera is fairly jumpy. There you go. You can kind of see it. There's a little over and under exposure there, and it's just a lot more intuitive to my eye. It's also a lot easier to read because it's right on the side of the frame, so it's much more natural to redirect your eye looks over there for your exposure reading. With the F2, I would say the exposure readout is very distracting. The other thing too is it's at the very extreme bottom of the viewfinder, and therefore sometimes depending on how you're holding the camera, it's actually kind of difficult to see, and sometimes you got to move. You'll be holding the camera and you won't be able to see it. You kind of have to move the camera up and down to kind of catch that meter reading if you're using the internal meter. So I kind of wish they would have stuck with the older style like they had in these older bodies, and some of these technically lower end, although this thing is still pretty tough. It's definitely not as nice as the F2. So that was one thing that I wish Nikon would have done for that. So the probably final thing I don't care for on this camera is with pretty much every other film body, I would say when it's time to open it up, basically you're going to open up this again is the XD11, but insert most other film cameras from the 1970s and 80s. You're going to pull up on this, pop that open, load your film, push it back in, push that in. Very simple, very straightforward, very universal. I would argue that the F2 is probably a little more secure. However, it's just not as simple. Now in mine, For some reason, I have to kind of loosen this screw off. I don't know if that's normal. I don't really remember having to do that on my other F2, but this one I do seem to have to do that. But then you flip this up, and then it's not really like a loosen like you would think. You just move this around, and then it pops the door open. Okay, it's not the worst. It's a pretty minor complaint, but I'm not a big fan of it. I would much rather it be just the more traditional, but I can see where this is probably a little more secure. When you push it in, it does latch, and then you move it over to closed, lock this down, and again, I don't know if that's just this example, but I tend to kind of tighten that. I don't know if that's a set screw. I don't keep it super tight. This thing is it doesn't have any light leaks. It's perfectly fine. I said that was it for complaints. However, I do have one more, and it sounds like I have more complaints than I do for things that I do like on the camera. However, I think my final complaint is probably this: the light meter is only on when this is pulled out. Now, it's a very definitive. It's not loose. Like when this thing's out. Advanced film. So right now it is on. You see that red dot? It's on. Now that's the same for a lot of Nikon cameras. Same as this old FT2. Same thing. Red dot. Now this one does not have this nice of a film advance, but so right now the meter's on. So you don't want to store the camera like this. It's going to drain your battery. So when you push it in, then it turns the light meter off. And it's all fine. However, when I'm shooting, what I find is a lot of times it doesn't really, once you have the film wound and it's ready to take a shot, the advance lever doesn't move out very far, and sometimes it doesn't work very well. So a lot of times I find myself pushing this back in, and then I'm looking, and then if I want to take a meter reading, what's going on? How come? Oh, yep, I got to pull that out. So it's not my favorite. I'm not gonna lie. Most other film cameras I have had experience with, which are quite a few. For example, this one also does that, but it gives you a much longer throw before it actually starts winding the film. So I can easily tuck my thumb in behind here, and advance. So there you have it. With the Nikon F2, it has a very short throw. The film advance does, and it doesn't give you as much play. It probably doesn't seem like it on the screen, but it really doesn't give you as much. So, okay, so there I just unloaded a whole bunch of stuff that I don't like about the F2, which was honestly longer than I thought it was going to be. I didn't really plan this video out. However, this camera is one of the most well-made man-made items I have ever held. Just everything on it, the machining, the engraving, where the serial numbers are, that's all engraved. That's not just roll stamped or something like that. That is engraved on there. Everything, the rewind, it's so everything, the machining on it, everything is such a tight fit. I hate to use the word perfect in the fit and finish, but this camera, the fit and finish is basically perfect. It's so well made. It's so solid. The last F2 I had, I dropped a few times actually, and it was perfectly fine. It didn't have a dent in it, nothing like that. So they're very well built cameras. I like the self timer is pretty self-explanatory on it. I like that. I like where the depth of field preview is. I actually really like that. It really it's easy to grab a hold. I really like that. I use that quite a bit actually. This shutter release is, I would say, a must unless you're going to do a lot of with a what do you call it, shutter release cable, one of these guys. Even though this one actually wouldn't work on there, the traditional screw-in style. This one is kind of sunken in here a little bit. It's not bad, but you can certainly get used to it. It's very usable. However, If you get Nikon, and they have aftermarket ones too, it's very simple. Yeah, AR1. All it does is threads in here. And my other one, I had an aftermarket one, an older aftermarket one. It was perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with it. But that really helps the shooting experience, I would say. So the other thing is, it's just a classic camera. There's no frills. It's all mechanical. They are extremely reliable. Extremely reliable. I there's still so many working examples of the F2 out there. They still can be serviced. There's still people out there that service them. Even the metered heads on them, the only electric part of the camera, if that goes down, it's not a big deal. You can take a meter reading. Most people have phones. Most of us, if you're shooting film, probably have a light meter app on your phone. So if your light meter goes down, the camera is still 100% functional. So that's probably the biggest thing. Just the build quality and the functionality of it. It's not relying on batteries, nothing like that, and it's just a classic tough camera. So the question I asked at the beginning was, is this something I would recommend to somebody getting into film photography? If you're going out and you're like, hey, I want to try a manual focus film camera, I want something like this. Is this the camera I'm going to recommend? Probably not for most people. I think it's overkill for most people. I think newer cameras, again, I have the XD11 from Minolta, but you could insert any number of Nikon FEs, FAs, FGs, all the different brands. They all have cameras very similar to this, where they are smaller bodies, lighter weight bodies, and probably a little more traditional. Shutter speed here. If they're newer and they have different kind of modes here. Much more user friendly, and I would say a little more ergonomic. I'm not going to lie, this camera, even in manual mode, is much easier to operate. The shutter speed is right there. I don't really have to. It's just a lot easier. I will say the F2 takes a little bit. The I will call them the manual of arms is a lot different on the F2 compared to most cameras. Again, your shutter speed up here, you really can't grab it from down here. So your shutter speed's up here. Your ISO, again, a lot of other cameras, it's over here, something like that. This one is on top of the shutter speed dial. So it is very different. I would say if you're used to a more, I would say, more common camera body, something like this, you're definitely going to take a while to get used to this. However, once you do, it's like anything else. It kind of becomes like riding a bike. You just kind of never forget how to use it. So I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner. However, if you're to the point where you're like, yeah, these are really nice, but I kind of want something, I would say, a little more special, something a little more iconic. These are great cameras to have, and they're built like tanks. When you buy this, that this, to me, is a generational camera. You could hand this down probably a few generations, possibly without even ever getting it service, and it's probably going to keep working. So anyway, I will wrap the video up, and I will leave it at that. Nikon F2, great camera. Just do consider that there are some lighter weight, probably slightly more ergonomic options out there, but nonetheless, great camera. One other aspect, and this was actually the reason I chose to start off when I got back into film photography a while ago, is to go with the F2, was for a metered camera. The F2 gives you the ability to run non-AI Nikkor lenses. So if you're in the Nikon system, probably know all about AI, non-AI lenses. The Nikon can run, the F2 can run basically every lens that Nikon has. Honestly, even if it doesn't have the prong on there, you can still put it on there. You're just not going to have metering capability. So you can put brand new Nikkor lenses on this, and as long as it's an F mount, it will mount on there. You'll just have to meter it. However, any Nikkor lens, whether it's a non-AI, AI, or AIS, if it has the prongs on here, you will be able to meter with it. So you'll have full function of the camera's metering ability. But unlike some of the newer bodies, which do not have the aperture prong, which is going to be most of the cameras, especially from the I would say early to mid to late 70s, and then everything after that are not going to necessarily need the prong. They're not going to have the metering prong, but Nikon kept putting that on there, luckily. So as you can see, this is a non-AI lens. This is a pre-AI lens, and essentially that means if I were to put this on a newer Nikon body like an FA or an FE or any of those cameras that have auto indexing, they would not know what to do with it. It would still work, but there would be no metering available. So if that camera had aperture priority, that function would not work with this. So that is one major thing about the F2 that I kind of forgot to mention when I made this video the first time, and I had to cut it in here because if you are just doing this for fun and you're just being a little more budget oriented, then the F2 and some of these earlier bodied Nikons are not a bad option because they do give you that option to buy these pre-AI lenses, which sometimes are not as updated with some of the coatings. However, you can still get a lot, especially when they have this more modern focusing ring design. A lot of times they are very similar, if not the exact same, to um, the more modern AI and AIS lenses. Some of the ones that have the old style scalloped, those are beautiful lenses. Sometimes those ones tend to not be as good. Not all of them, but some of the earlier ones tend to not be quite as good just because they don't have some of the more modern coatings and the optical designs might not be quite as good. So keep that in mind if you're looking at these. If you want to be able to run a wider range of Nikkor lenses, and you don't want to mess around with worrying about if a lens you're getting is AI lens or non-AI lens. That's another big advantage of the F2 in the Nikon film body world is you don't have to worry about any of those. So anyway, I just wanted to add that little piece in there. So thank you for watching.